Shalom everyone, welcome to a special short audio recording by Hebrew in Israel. I'm Yoel Halevi, your host. And we are in the reading of Parashat Noach, and there's a very, very classic interpretation that I have seen used multiple times by different people who are scholars, people who are more laymen, but it's become a popular interpretation of text. And I actually want to put this interpretation into context because I think there is an exaggeration in what this text is actually saying. I think there's an exaggeration in what it actually means. And I think that if we understand the origins of some of these interpretations and we understand what these interpretations really are, we will get a better understanding of what to accept and what not to accept, especially when it comes from opinions that people have in regards to what the text is saying. Before I even go into the subject, and just not to keep you hanging, the subject is what exactly happened between Cham and Noach when Noach got drunk. And the classic interpretation a lot of people have been using, or I would say pseudo-classic, because this is not really an interpretation everyone accepts, but the idea is that Cham either raped or castrated his father. And this interpretation has become very, very popular in the last couple of years, I think mostly because specific people have read some sources and have come forward with these sources and said, look what we found. Now, a very quick background, because this might be something that people are listening to that don't really know who I am. I was raised in an Orthodox family, and I actually went to yeshiva for a very, very long time. I was yeshiva trained and academically trained in Jewish sources. And the problem that I find as a trained person in these fields, actually trained, is that there's a tendency to take sources and just read them as they are. Now, I'm also trained as an historian, so which means I had to deal with a lot throughout my training and throughout my career. I have to do a lot with ancient inscriptions, ancient documents, and interpreting them correctly. And when you come across an interpretation that's not only not really fitting to the text, what we will call a midrash, and then you meet people who read this as this is fact, you kind of lose the contextual background of such a statement. And we need to understand that when you use a source, any source, whatever that source may be, you have to be very, very careful what you do with that source and how you use that source, and try to actually understand what the source is saying. Now, what I'm about to say is something that I think a lot of people don't have critical understanding of how to understand Jewish sources. Jewish sources are always an evolving and highly opinionated material, which means that you are going to see loads of different opinions, but all these opinions cannot coexist. For example, years ago, I was working in a place and had a conversation with a young man who I was only a few years older than him, but I was already more critical in the way I was thinking, but I was still in the years of being in yeshiva. And I noticed that when we were discussing something about the practice of the lulav and how you're supposed to use your lulav, the this young man looked at a picture that we had in my workplace, which was of a lulav set up in a completely different way than the one we traditionally see. Now, this picture specifically was from a Bar Kochva coin, where the Bar Kochva coin actually contains a description of one lulav, one etrog, one hadas, and one arava, the four species according to the rabbinic interpretation. And he was very surprised. He said, no, this is not how it's supposed to be. Now, the problem was that he only knew this one interpretation, this one way of practicing things. And he was very, very unaware of the fact that there were other opinions out there. And when people had their opinion, even if it was a halachic opinion, basically Jewish Torah law, this opinion counted. Now, the problem that we have is that there's midrash and there's halacha. In midrash, opinions are just opinions. in halacha, opinions actually have to be supported with different rules and regulations that cause halacha to become halacha. Which means that when I read a midrash, which is an interpretation of a story, this midrash can be absolutely nothing as well. Now, how dare I say this? Well, very simple. I'm not the first one to say this. There were plenty of rabbis throughout the centuries who looked at a midrash and said, well, whatever, I don't care about this. There's a very, very famous letter, well, not very famous, it's famous to those who've studied this, but there was a very famous rabbi called Rav Hai Gaon, who was a Babylonian rabbi. He was from the time of the Gaonites, one of the last Gaonites, basically around the 10th to 11th century, to the Common Era. And he was asked many, many questions. And in some of the letters that were sent to him, people were asking him questions about certain midrashim and certain practices, like medical practices and so on, which appear in the Talmud. And they said, we tried these medical practices and they don't work. How is it what the rabbis were wrong? And Rav Hai Gaon would answer, well, in truth, we don't necessarily know exactly what they meant here. We don't have the exact same medicine they had. And also, it's quite possible it doesn't work. Now, some people would argue, yeah, because nature has changed. Nature has not changed, okay? Now, even later than that, the Maimonides, the Rambam, who was part of we can call it the rationalistic Judaism movement, which exists to this very day, was dismissive of Midrashim as well, where he actually taught not to overuse Midrashim as a form of study because it really distracts you. And what exactly really is a Midrash is a very, very complex subject, and there have been loads of studies done on what a Midrash is, and if you study Judaics or you're interested in this, there's plenty of material about it, but Midrashim are not necessarily there to give you pshat, to give you the literal meaning. So there actually is a very long precedent of rabbis rejecting Midrashim and explaining things differently, and sometimes literally on the pshat, to allow the story to be what it is. Now, if I also draw for a moment from my training as a Bible scholar, we need to also understand that storytelling can contain different messages. And focusing on the message is much more important than sometimes trying to find some little detail what exactly happened there. And I actually tell, because I personally teach Bible, I teach Biblical Hebrew as well, that you need to be aware of the fact that if something's not told to you in a story, it provides two things. First of all, you can complete things through your own thought, but mostly, and this is my argument, mostly it allows you to focus on the main message of what's being said. Now, going now back to our story, and this is from Bereshit 9, and we're talking about verse 20 to 24. Actually, it goes longer than that. The story actually goes all the way to 29, but our focus would be mostly on the first couple verses, 20 to 23. And the story itself reads as follows. So it says, Vayachel Noach, Isha Adama Veita Karim. So it started that Noach, the man of the field, the man of the earth, planted a vineyard. Vayesht min hayayin vayishkar. He drank from the wine and he became drunk. Vayitgal betoch aholo. And he revealed himself, basically exposed himself. He was naked inside the tent. Vayah Cham avi Canaan. So Cham, the father of Canaan, and there's a very specific reason Canaan is mentioned here. Okay, there's a context here. Eter vat aviv, he saw the nakedness of his father. Now, a lot of people try to link this to the description of seeing the nakedness in Leviticus 18 and 20. However, this is one style of text, and Leviticus 18 and 20 is another style of text. Leviticus is a legal document which uses legal terminology. We don't necessarily have to draw parallels between these two. Vayaged l'shnei achav b'chutz, and he said to his two brothers outside. Why emphasize that it's outside? This is also pivotal. So the brothers, being righteous men, do the obvious, what a righteous son should do. Vayikach Shem v'Yefet. So Shem and Yefet took, and Vayikach is in the singular, but it's not unusual. Singular verbs describing two people doing the exact same action is quite common in Biblical Hebrew. Eta simla, they took a garment. Simla means modern Hebrew dress, but this just means garment. Vayasimu al shechem shenehem, and they put it on the shoulders of each other, basically carrying it backwards on their shoulders, which means they can just basically drop it back. This actually might have been some large blanket, by the way. This is where they had to carry it on their shoulders. Vayelechu ahonit, they walked back. Vayechasu et arvat avihem, and they covered the nakedness of their father. Ufnehem ahoranit, and their faces was facing backwards, which means they weren't looking at their father. Ve'arvat avihem lo ra'u, and the nakedness of their father didn't see. There's a parallel here between multiple details. And the fact that we have a parallel here of seeing and not seeing indicates that what's really going on is that Cham saw the nakedness of his father. Okay? Now, what is the source that deals with the rape or castration? So it's actually appears in Rashi. Everyone starts with Rashi. If you're a Jewish boy studying in school, you start with Rashi, and it actually says, "Vayar." This is for verse 22. Vayar Cham et avi Chenan. Yesh mirabotenu omrim. There are some of our rabbis who say, "Kna'an ra'a v'higid le'aviv lekach huzkar al hadavar v'nitkalal." Kna'an saw and said to his father, which means he boasted to his father his disgrace, and some version says to his brothers, okay, which does create a different variation here. Boasting to his brothers is directly in the text. So what is Rashi really telling us that's new here? So saying to his father would be a version where he's actually telling his father to his face something very, very rude. Okay? Therefore, it was mentioned and was cursed. Okay? It's saying that the Rashi, the first variant of the story that Rashi gives is that it was a seeing and that was it. And actually, when you look up the source, this is from Tanchuma, which is a very, very early midrash. Tanchuma on this verse, Tanchuma 58:15. But then Rashi adds and says, "Vayar et ervat aviv." He relates directly to the term, and he saw the nakedness of his father. Yesh mirabotenu. Some of our rabbis omrim seraso, v'yesh omrim reva'o. Some of our rabbis say that he castrated him, and some of them say that he laid with him. And this is taken from Sanhedrin 70a, okay? And they say there in the Talmud, "De'en lomar kemashma'o sherara irvato." That is not to say that is literally that he only saw the nakedness. Dehaketiv b'kara, for it says in the text, "Asher asalo beno hakatan," which his youngest son did to him. Uma shera'a en ze asiya nikra, and the idea of seeing is not doing. Well, the thing is that's, I would openly say, first of all, it's a midrash, which means it's one interpretation out of several that can exist. But also, if we do a close reading of the text, we take a pshat reading, what's really going on is the following. We need to understand that there's actually a law in Jewish law about seeing the nakedness of a parent as a form of honor, of honoring your parent, and not just doing whatever you want, barging on your parent when they're taking a shower and stuff like that. To this very day, most adults do not get naked in front of their children, especially if they're adults and the child is an adult. Okay? And what this creates, and you have to just think about logically for a moment, because I when I kept on seeing these videos where people were discussing this horrible thing that Cham did, it becomes almost ridiculous, because if you don't stop to think about the reality of seeing a parent naked, you're not going to barge into your parents' room or their shower. It's a form of disrespect. It actually falls in the category of honoring your father and your mother, something also that we naturally are supposed to do. But if we do a close reading of the text, we'll notice the following. First of all, it stresses that he is the father of Canaan. Why make this point? The reason to make this point is because the Canaanites throughout the biblical narrative are considered to be people who are sexually promiscuous, I would say. There is some difficulty in proving this from historical documents, but the understanding is that sexual activity amongst the Canaanites was very, very negative. This is why, for example, in the story of Abraham, it says it's not the sin of the Amorite, which is just another word for Canaanites. There are several variations of what you can call Canaanite. Amorite really means Amuru, the Westerners, which means people who lived in the land of Israel of today, even a little bit into Lebanon, that they were considered to be sexually promiscuous. They would do things that the Israelites would consider to be abhorrent. So this is more of what you would call an origin story of why do they do this? Why do they behave in this way? So that's the first thing. Now it only says that he saw the nakedness of his father. The text doesn't tell us anything beyond that, which means that this is mostly speculative, anything who claims anything else. But the most important thing here, it says, Vayaged l'shnei echav b'chutz. Instead of doing what any child naturally would do when something like this happens, is just walk back, close your eyes, run out of the room, and say, oops, I made a mistake here, and just never talk about it, and never do anything about it. He goes out and he tells his brothers. He sees the nakedness of his father. That might have been an accident, or may not have been an accident. He might have known that his father was becoming drunk. It's a possibility. But the main thing that's emphasized here is that he tells his brothers, bachutz, outside. This is not just, I saw and that was it. No, he went out and he told his brothers. He was mocking his father. It seems more reasonable to make that argument than to claim anything else. This is why very specific words are picked here. And the brothers do the exact opposite, which means that we're being shown through the opposite action what actually happened in the original action. And again, it has to do with seeing and respecting. The Cham disrespected, Shem and Yefet respect. They go in, they cover their father. So what is the thing that his son did to him? Okay, when it says in verse 24, Vayikatz Noach miyeno, Noach woke up from his wine, from his drunkenness. Vayedai et asher asalo beno hakatan, and he knew what his youngest son did to him. What does it mean he knew what he did? What was the deed that was done? Well, it's in direct relation to the fact that he went in, saw, and specifically told his brothers. Now, what's very interesting is an interpretation given by Rav Saadia Gaon, who was again a Gaonite in the 10th century, and he says openly, Bahutz fi el suk. He says outside in the market. Why pick this word outside in the market? Very, very, very simple. Outside in the market basically indicates the idea of gossiping, of telling people's shame outside. So it's really important to understand, I'm going to wrap this up with this, it's really important to understand this interpretation of castration or rape was something that is one opinion out of others. But when you read the pshat, it's not something you can really find inside the text. I hope this recording has enlightened you better on the subject, to understand the source of this argument, the difficulties with it, and how to actually closely read this text to get a better understanding of what actually happened. Kol Tov.